Support for Diabetes Connections comes from Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you're at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more, go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacy. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacy Sims.
This week, Happy New Year! This is our first episode of 2024, so let's talk about what this year could bring. I'm doing some predictions with the wonderful Gary Scheiner. We'll take a quick look back at 2023, find out what he's most looking forward to in 2024, and what else we might expect in diabetes in the months to come. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome, everybody, to another week of the show, our first week of 2024. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. The start of a new year, of course, can mean new beginnings. Maybe you've made some resolutions, you're thinking of making changes. We're not changing too much around here. I already made enough changes in 2023, adding in-person events and adding a second podcast for the type 2 community. So I'm good with change. I think we need to settle in for a little while, though, in the next couple of months. But for the last few years, I have done a prediction episode. You can go back and listen to those. I will link them up in the show notes and see how we did. Last year, we did great, I think, in terms of predicting the technology approvals and advances, things that the FDA signed off on. But to show you how much things can change in a year, we did last year's prediction show as a live Twitter space. I really thought Twitter Spaces were going to be a cool way to do live audio on social. Twas not to be, of course. Has pretty much gone the way of Clubhouse. Remember Clubhouse? And Blab, which probably two of you remember. But I loved Blab. It was great. It was an easy way to connect live with video and audio. Anyway, maybe we'll figure out how to do more live stuff on social in this new year. I can't believe nobody's figured out a way to do basically radio on social, take calls and things like that. How fun would that be? All right, anyway, my guest is the wonderful Gary Scheiner, a CDCES, who is the owner and founder of Integrated Diabetes Services. He's been named Educator of the Year by the ADA. He is the author of Think Like a Pancreas and has launched a podcast with the same name. Gary also lives with type 1. And we didn't so much do this prediction episode like a crystal ball, guessing dates and approvals. It was really more of just a fun conversation about the road ahead. I love talking to Gary, and he took this conversation in some directions I didn't expect, frankly. And you will hear from him right after this. You know that I'm a big fan of choice when it comes to diabetes technology. I get so excited when there's something new because if you live with diabetes, you deserve to find the best fit for you. That's just one reason I'm working with Omnipod to help spread the word about what makes it so easy to test their system out. If you want to try an insulin pump or see what life without tubes is all about, you can try Omnipod 5 with no commitment or obligation. You can try Omnipod even if your current tubed pump is in warranty. Really, you heard that right? And if it's not right for you, no problem. Omnipod does not tie you down with a contract or a tube. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. Terms and conditions apply for full safety, risk information, and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Gary, welcome back. It's always great to talk to you. And this is going to be a fun show. I'm excited to hear what's in your brain. Thanks for being here.
What's in my brain, Stacy? Has nothing to do with diabetes, but I'll try to channel that little nugget of information for you.
I love it. It really was a fun year after we want to take a quick look back at 2023 and talk about what's going to happen, we think, or what we're looking forward to in 2024. And I don't know, maybe my first impression is it's kind of nice after a couple of years where not a lot was happening, obviously COVID, other things. There was a lot of action in 2023. Taking a look back, what stands out to you?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. First off, I was really excited that some positivity came out of COVID, virtual care became more the norm. And I can tell you from experience, because my practice has been providing virtual care since 2006. Ever since my kids taught me how to use Skype, if you remember Skype, we've been doing virtual care since then. But now it's becoming more acceptable, more in vogue. People are using it, and it grew out of necessity during COVID. But people weren't just sitting idle during COVID either. The tech industry and the pharmaceutical industry were still moving ahead with things, and a lot of it came through in 2022, 2023, once people got back to full-time work.
Yeah. Before we move on to that, just to stay on telehealth for a minute, I've seen a few different studies saying telehealth has been amazing for people with diabetes. Telehealth wasn't as great as we thought for people with diabetes. From a patient perspective, people listening, right? Like, what should they be thinking about when they hear telehealth? Any advice?
Yeah, I prefer to call it virtual care.
Virtual, okay.
Telehealth, people think, well, I'm just talking on the phone with somebody, like a telephone. But virtual care now, it encompasses a lot of stuff. It could be phone conversations, but it can also be email correspondence. It can be texting back and forth. And in a lot of cases, it's video, like we do here, using the different platforms, Teams and Zoom and things like that. Or I don't know if anybody's still using Skype, but I imagine.
Wait, let me just say in defense of Skype, I cannot believe Skype lost to Zoom. I loved Skype. I still use it. The only reason I don't use it more, because frankly, the little inside baseball, the audio quality is better. It records automatically on 2 MP3 tracks. I don't have to convert anything like I do with Zoom, but it lost and nobody uses it anymore. So it's hard for me to use because I can't, if I say to you, I'm going to call you on Skype, people panic. They're like, I don't know my username. I forgot my password. It's a whole thing. It
became a verb. I'm going to Skype you in an hour.
I miss it.
And in a lot of cases, the virtual care, especially with the patients that I work with who are on intensive insulin programs, a lot of it is data review and corresponding about that and fine tuning and teaching where it's appropriate to do so. There's only a few things that are more difficult to do or not possible to do on a virtual basis. Some of the physical exams that are necessary in diabetes care, things like foot exams, but we can also teach patients how to do their own foot exams or teach a partner how to do it properly. Checking the thyroid gland, that's something, it's a hands-on procedure. But checking one's skin, that we can teach people how to do that. The other thing, because we have so many patients using insulin pumps now, is teaching infusion set changes. It can be done virtually, but I find it's a little easier to do in person. Little dexterity issues and logistics involved. So there's really, just a handful of things that it's better to do in person, but just about everything else we can handle pretty effectively on a virtual basis.
That's great. In terms of technology from 2023 and into 2024, it was really interesting this year because we saw quite a few approvals for systems and software. We got the G7 for Dexcom at the very end of 2022. And that, of course, was then sent out. People were able to get it in 2023. Anything stand out to you in particular from those approvals?
Well, a handful of things. For the first time since insulin was discovered, we have a treatment now that kind of gets at the root cause of type 1 diabetes and can help delay or possibly prevent it in a medication called Tzield. And the company that developed that Provention was acquired by Sanofi, big pharma company, and it's being marketed pretty aggressively now. But it also got us thinking more about other things we can be doing to slow the progression of type 1 diabetes when it's caught in its early stages. And nowadays, we recommend that all first-degree relatives of people with type 1 are screened for antibodies. And if the antibody tests are positive, then we can start implementing these like I call them beta cell bubble wrap strategies, where we're taking these beta cells that are under attack and let's put a shield around them. Let's protect them. And there's a lot of things we can do. And Tzield kind of being at the forefront of that from a medication standpoint has been FDA approved for use in what's called stage 2 of type 2 diabetes development. I'm sorry, stage 2 of type 1 diabetes development. But there's a lot of other stuff we can do with like exercise, vitamin D supplementation, low glycemic index diets. There's a whole series of strategies we can use. So that got us thinking a little differently about the whole diabetes game as far as, it's one thing to treat it once you got it, but now we got a lot of strategies we can use to prevent it in people at high risk.
It's really interesting. When we've been doing the podcast since 2015 and we watched, Tzield come into play, right? We took a lot of studies on teplizumab, lots of people talking about this for a long time. I now know 4 or 5 families that have had their kids taken the early detection tests and have taken Tzield and have been either in the trials or and they're pretty sure they got it. I mean, who knows? These were double blind, or who actually went and got it this past year. It's funny, Gary, I when I was talking about technology and things, I'm thinking about stuff that benefits people who are living with type 1 now, people like you, people like my son. I wasn't first going to this kind of prevention type of treatment. So I guess what I'm asking is, when we look back at this year, do you think this is really going to be a turning point? I get worried. Like, I don't want to get my hopes up too high.
Well, worry is a key word, because people with type 1, adults especially, we worry about our loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want them to inherit these traits and these genes that can contribute to type 1. So now the beauty of screening, doing the antibody tests in our loved ones, is if they come back negative, no antibodies, we can relax, big weight off our shoulders. If they test positive, now we're empowered. There are things we can do about it. And we didn't have this years ago. We didn't have techniques and strategies and meds that we could utilize to prevent or delay the development. And I think one of the key things people ignore or don't pay attention to when it comes to the Tzield, to say, on average, it delays 2-3 years development of type 1. But when people eventually do get diagnosed type 1, their honeymoon goes on almost indefinitely. It really prolongs the honeymoon phase. If you remember with your son, if he had a honeymoon phase, those were the good old days. I mean, diabetes was a cinch to manage. You get all the benefits of the attention and treats and whatnot, but the glucose management is so easy at that phase. It's like college without classes. You get all the benefits and none of the downside.
Oh, man. It's a great analogy. I have a college freshman, so I hear you.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the classes, wouldn't it be fun? Yeah, so that prolonged honeymoon is wonderful. It's a great experience to have. So
that's really interesting. So do you mind talking a little bit more about that? Because with a honeymoon, does that mean perhaps that the beta cells are being preserved in a way that, maybe if this treatment gets better and better, it could be an indefinite preservation? Is that the idea?
That is the current thinking,
Wow.
Stacey, because eventually the effects of the teplizumab, the Tzield treatment, is going to wear off. So at some point, they're going to start studying kind of boosters, if you will, kind of like the COVID boosters. Maybe every few years you get an infusion of this medication and it can preserve beta cell function long term and not just for a few years.
It's remarkable to think about that. Yeah. And by the way, Benny, I don't know if he was diagnosed for so young or it was just one of those things. He really didn't even have a honeymoon. Mm-hmm. It felt to me like it was just one day this and then the next day, boom. And I know everybody's different, but man, it just makes me laugh to think about those days. Sorry.
Yeah, I was the same as him. When the day I was diagnosed, my beta cells were dead as a doornail. Yeah. I had no insulin production at all. And it made glucose management really challenging from the get-go. The people who get it diagnosed earlier on, I went months just peeing my brains out. I'd had it a while before my diagnosis. So people who get it diagnosed earlier on still have some beta cell function. Even just a little bit of beta cell function makes an enormous difference.
Gary, remind me, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 18.
You were 18. Okay.
From a medication standpoint, another thing that came in vogue in the last year or two is Mounjaro. This it belongs to a class of drugs called GLP-1 receptor agonists. It's a long name, but what this class of medications does is for people who still make insulin, it amplifies the insulin production. But its main effects is it diminishes appetite, it slows digestion, and it also kind of blocks glucagon production by the pancreas. So the pancreas is normally making glucagon various times of day. by making less, blood sugars are easier to control. But the weight reduction that is seen with this is phenomenal. So Mounjaro is a little bit more effective than even Ozempic and Trulicity, some of the other GLP-1s on the market, because it's a GLP-GIP. It has two different kind of medications combined in one. So the weight loss that's seen with it is even superior to those. People's appetites are really suppressed. Hopefully not to the point of extreme nausea, though that happens sometimes, but it's obviously approved for use in type 2 diabetes, but many people with type 1 are using it because weight control is difficult for anybody on insulin. It's very hard to lose weight. Insulin, it drives hunger. It promotes storage of fuel like fat. So excess weight is a problem for a lot of people with type 1. One of the best ways to get insurance to cover it, though, if you have type 1, is you got to convince your doctor to re-diagnose you.
I have heard this from several people. Your doctor can write it and say, oh, this person has type 2?
Yeah. Yeah. You can have type 1 and type 2.
Oh, that's what I was just going to ask.
It is possible.
You won't get any
you're always
trouble
going to
getting
have type 1, but
okay.
they can also diagnose you with type 2 if you have any degree of insulin resistance, which most of us do have. And that way, insurance will typically cover it. And it's very beneficial. I mean, because it slows digestion, it's easier to manage glucose levels after meals. It doesn't, spike as much.
Well, I did want to talk about it because to me, the biggest health story of 2023, forget diabetes, is the GLP-1 and the incredible way it's just kind of taken over the conversation. Ozempic, Mounjaro, as you mentioned, Wegovy, what are they calling it? Zeptide or something, the weight loss that Mounjaro is now, labeled as. So it's fascinating to see how that has kind of taken over the main conversation. But when it comes to type 1 diabetes, you said Mounjaro is approved for type 2, not type 1. Same with Ozempic. Are we going to see clinical trials? Or is there any evidence, that people with type 1 will have more information and will have more evidence that this should be covered? Take control of your diabetes with a broad range of diabetes management supplies from Edgepark. The latest diabetes supplies and continuous glucose monitors from top brands simplify blood sugar management. Edgepark accepts most insurance plans, and Medicare Advantage cover certain devices. Plus, Edgepark takes care of the insurance paperwork to make ordering as seamless as possible. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo to learn more about Edgepark's diabetes supplies and CGM devices.
Well, there is evidence. It's limited evidence, but as far as conducting controlled studies on it, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's just not enough of a market for these big pharma companies to invest in that. And I mean, believe me, it's not my preference. I wish they would, but the reality is it's very expensive to run these studies and submit to the FDA. And it's very time consuming. And it's financially, it's just not viable for them. Yeah. So our best option is just to try to add to your diagnosis T1, T2, and
yeah. I asked not because I'm worried about the safety. I'm asking obviously because I'm worried about the insurance coverage and things like that. And it's just so many hoops to jump through already. So I was hoping you'd say, yes, there's 20 trials going on right now. And Lilly and all these companies are very excited about getting type 1 people on it. No, we're too small.
I wish I could say that.
Yeah.
But another thing as far as insurance coverage that improved was in the last year, Medicare expanded its insurance coverage for continuous glucose monitors. You don't have to be on intensive insulin therapy. You don't have to have type 1. Now, anybody who just takes one dose a day of long-acting basal insulin qualifies, as do people who take medications that can cause hypoglycemia and who have experienced low blood sugars. So medications like sulfonylureas and meglitinides that a lot of people with type 2 still take, now it makes them eligible for Medicare coverage. And a lot of private plans follow Medicare's lead. So the insurance coverage for CGM is certainly improving. I'd love to see it available for anybody with diabetes because I think it's so much more valuable than just in helping prevent low blood sugar. It's such a valuable learning tool for all of us to see cause and effect relationships as far as how different foods affect us and activities and emotions, et cetera. Helps us hone our behaviors in a certain way.
Yeah.
I learned certain cereals kill me in the morning. mean, I can tolerate certain ones, things like, Cheerios, right? Rice Krispies, stuff like that.
Mm.
If I eat shredded wheat, forget about it. I don't know why. My glucose goes through the roof. I count the carbs to the nearest molecule. I got it down. It doesn't matter. Even if I take the dose of insulin, I should just skyrocket.
And
So
who would think Rice Krispies are better than shredded wheat?
you never know. It's different for different people.
Right. That's something you can learn from a CGM.
My body just doesn't like shredded wheat for some reason.
Kind of a gross cereal, Gary, I got to tell you. I mean, I'm sorry if you enjoy it, but I mean, of those three, that would not be my top pick.
Yeah. Well, maybe a little frosted shredded wheat.
Oh, now we're talking.
That's a little easier to tolerate.
But, with CGM, I've got to think the coverage is going to get better and better, because why else would Dexcom be investing in a CGM that they announced last year that is specifically designed for people with type 2 who do not dose insulin? You've seen this. What do you think is going to happen with that? And my curious question is, what makes it so different? Like, why is it really different?
It's not really different from the G7. It's just a simplified form that comes with a handheld receiver to see the data as opposed to the phone app. But, the G7 is already a very simplified type of a sensor. I mean, that thing is, to me, it's the pinnacle of continuous glucose monitoring. Not to take anything away from like the Libre 3, which is also a good system, but to me, the Dexcom G7, hands down, it's got the combination of accuracy, simplicity. It's also feature rich for those who want the features, mostly people who are more engaged in their management. And it integrates. It integrates with a multitude of automated insulin delivery systems that can help self-regulate the insulin doses.
Let's go there. Let's talk about integration, because I think for many of the people who listen to this podcast who are super interested in the technology, this was the big story here at the end of 2023 and into 2024, where you can now have an insulin pump, the t:slim X2, which is the first one, I believe, that you can use with two different sensors, G6 or G7 of the Dexcom, and integration with Libre should be coming this year. To me, the little teeny bites of interoperability that we're finally seeing get me very excited. Tell me what your folks are saying about this.
They're not saying a lot. For the most part, when it comes to the CGM, I don't find a lot of people who prefer the Libre to the Dexcom, at least with the G7 available now. So having the ability to choose the Dexcom G7 and other sensors doesn't do much for them, because they want the Dexcom G7 anyway. Where I think it's going to make a difference is with the algorithm, the software that's used to calculate insulin needs and make the adjustments, because some of these algorithms that are available now allow the user very little opportunity to be involved, and some users want to be involved. They recognize situations where they can program certain overrides and change certain settings to manage better. So for the people who like that, there are algorithms that let them do that. But then there are those out there who don't want to be bothered. They just want a system to handle it, even if their glucose isn't ideal. They're okay with that as long as there's very little work involved. That's kind of where the iLet system sits. That system is virtually nothing the user can do other than tell it when they're eating. And you can say it's a big meal, a small meal, or a normal meal. That's it. And even if you don't do that, it'll still make its own assumptions based on what the blood sugar is doing and give like bolus type doses. But that system, you don't put basal settings in. There's no carb ratios. There's no carb counting, no correction formulas, nothing. You can't go in and tell it, give me 2 units because I'm running high. There's no ability to even do something like that. It manages everything. And for somebody who's not interested in thinking about their diabetes at all and just wants a system to take care of it, it's wonderful. But for people who are used to being involved in their own care and prefer to be involved in their care, it's going to come up short because the glucose management isn't quite as tight as you can get with more involvement.
Yeah. The other thing about it that I found a bit surprising, but makes sense when you think about the software, and I actually thought this would be a great pump for my son, who is very responsible, but does not want to think about diabetes at all, is that you can't use it without a CGM. Right? You can finger stick. I think it's a couple of days. It gives you some grace and then it's bye-bye. And his concern was, well, what if I'm in a place where my CGM keeps coming off, or what if we don't have a shipment or whatever? He is 19. He is not going to finger stick regularly. And certainly you can't use that pump. So I thought that was really interesting. It makes sense when you think about the software and how it's programmed, but I was a little surprised at that. So I don't know.
Yeah, you'd have to go back on shots temporarily until you got your sensor situation resolved.
Yeah, we all know that insurance can always make that.
That system's at kind of one end of the spectrum where you have very little work involved, but the glucose results are only fair. And then the other extreme are these DIY open source systems that they're not FDA approved, but the algorithms allow an infinite amount of user engagement and involvement and fine tuning. So you can achieve immaculate glucose control with this system, but it takes work. And then in the middle, we have something like the Medtronic, their 780 launched last year or so. It's kind of I find just in the middle. It doesn't use the Dexcom sensor, which is a downside for a lot of people. The Omnipod 5, which launched in the last year also, it's a simple system, not as simple as the iLet. You still have to count carbs, bolus, et cetera. And it doesn't allow a lot of user engagement beyond that, though. And the Tandem system, I find, is a little closer to the DIY stuff where the user does have the capability to fine tune a lot of things on their own. And it does achieve pretty tight glucose control as a result of that. So there's, we got 5 different categories of systems, and each one has its own level of user engagement and also a different degree of outcomes you can achieve. So that's where, working with a clinician who understands the systems can help a person find what's going to work best for them.
One of the things I'm curious about, I don't know if you can speak to this at all. I feel like something that hasn't changed for pumping in years and years and years are the infusion sets. Mm-hmm. And finally, we are seeing some behind the scenes moves, I think.
That was on my list of things to talk about.
Excellent. Yeah, I hate those infusion sets.
You're right. The infusion set it's where the rubber meets the road. If that's not working, you're going to have a lot of issues. When insulin absorption is inconsistent, unpredictable, irregular, it wreaks havoc on glucose management. Even when you're using an automated system, that system assumes that insulin it's delivering is absorbing and working just right. That's not always the case. So the insulin infusion sets are critical to success. Medtronic launched something called an extended wear set in the last year. The extended wear set does nothing more than ensure that the insulin getting into your body is cleaner than it used to be. All it does is filter out impurities and make sure that the preservative stays intact with the insulin until it gets into your body. And because of that, because it's a cleaner insulin, there's less irritation below the skin. There's fewer reactions below the skin. And because of that, you get longer life out of the set and more consistent glucose levels. I was amazed when I saw it. They didn't change the cannula, the thing that's actually in your body, one bit. Just by changing the insulin, making it purer and cleaner, it really does make a difference. Tandem acquired a company a few years ago called Capillary Biomedical. They were going the other way. They were working on the infusion set itself, making sure that it wasn't going to cause problems. And they did research and found that a very flexible tube could be used in an angled orientation with multiple perforations, like a sprinkler. So the insulin comes out of multiple places along the cannula. So there's no clogging. The absorption is better because you don't have this one ball of insulin. It's a lot of little droplets that come through. Tandem is continuing the research. They acquired the company, so hopefully we'll see that come to fruition at some point. But even without better equipment, there's things people can learn working with a good CDE, good clinician, about how to manage their infusion sites effectively. Things like learning proper rotation patterns, frequency of change outs, body parts that are going to tend to work best. How to spot early signs of trouble with those infusion sites. Those kind of skills are still very valuable to have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I see in, just anecdotally in a lot of the parenting Facebook groups, some really bad information about how to put an infusion set on, or what works, what doesn't work, and why is it always failing? And there's some very simple things. And we're not doing an episode on that today. Maybe in the future we can kind of talk
even
about
the
that.
Choice of infusion set can make a big difference. Yeah. A lot of people, just by default, they go with those really simple infusion sets with the cannula that goes straight in, little flexible cannula. but those are problematic. Those 90-degree soft cannulas often crimp under the skin. They often poke against muscle wall. We see a lot more issues with those sets. So other ones can work better for a lot of people. How did you? Your son was on a pump. How did you choose the infusion set when it came time?
My son was 2, and we said, I need the idiot-proof one. Give me the one that works the best, that I have to think about the least. And it was an Animas 2020 back in the day. And we had a wonderful educator, Lynette Steinman, who showed us how to put the infusion set on. And, it was a nightmare. Honestly, he ran away from us. He was fine with shots after a couple of weeks, but the infusion set was terrible, to the point where he was just scared of it. It was noisy. And we debated going back to shots, but at 2, we just loved the precision. The Animas, you could give a basal rate of 0.025, and it made we had lovely, lovely control for so many years. He was just an easy kid with everything but those freaking infusion set changes. But I will tell you, Gary, I used to tell myself this, and it's true. He's 19. He remembers none of that. He remembers none of it. So it's a kind of a cold comfort now, but that was the hardest part for us for many, many years. And I'll tell you something else that Benny said recently. I may take this out. We'll see. But I think I've said it before. So when I told him about the Medtronic longer infusion set, and I said, hey, this is like a 7-day infusion set. And he said, Mom, any infusion set is 7 days if you just believe. I'm like, what? But I will tell you, it can't be that bad, because he just saw his endo. There's no scar tissue. He's fine. He's doing great. But I'm like, oh my gosh, why do you have to do this to me? I hate him.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's hysterical.
Half the fun we have as parents is reminding our kids of all the stupid things they used to do when they were little.
Oh my God. But
this infusion set, you'd run the other way.
He would hide. We'd have to do jokes and games. And, it's one of those things where you do feel like, if pumping is so great, why is the infusion set still such a problem? And you can see why. It's because the population that uses it is not big enough. There's not enough money in it. We all know, but God, I don't understand. We'll rant and rave on that, but I'd love to have you come back on and give a little bit, not all your secrets away. We still want people to come see you, but just some easy things about infusion sets. I've lost the ball here.
Well, we were talking about the interoperable components of AID systems. And, there's a company called Tidepool organization out on the West Coast. For years, they've done a lot of great work with helping people put data together from different diabetes devices and do analysis, and healthcare providers can access it pretty easily. So what they did is they developed their own version of one of the DIY algorithms called Loop. And they developed a version of it that they submitted to the FDA and actually got approval on. So now the next step is finding partners, pump companies, CGM companies to integrate it with. So the Tidepool Loop will likely come to fruition at some point in the near future. But right now, it's just some amazing technology that's sitting there waiting for partners to.
I know. It's so frustrating, because we all thought, when that was approved, that it would really be out. I guess that leads you to another question all about the software. You mentioned Beta Bionics and how there's not a lot of user input, the DIY stuff where there can be a ton of user input. I also know a few DIY folks who have created a system where they're completely hands off and it does everything. Do you think we're going to see more aggressive, and by aggressive, I mean like super bolus power if you miss a meal, things like that? Will we see that in the next couple of years? Because I'm really excited for that kind of software that just really lifts the burden more.
Yeah, so the Loop is sort of the version that iPhone users have been using. That's why it's so popular. But now there's an iPhone version called IAPS, and it's a DIY open source type algorithm that is more aggressive about covering meals without the user's input. But there's limits to that. The people who've used that, and if they have a low carb meal or a low glycemic index meal, it'll do a decent job. They might get just a modest bump in their glucose before the algorithm kicks in and takes care of it. But if you're eating like me and have a bowl of cereal in the morning, heaven help you, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You're going to get an enormous spike, and it's going to take a while to come back down. So there's limits to what a fully automated system has the ability to handle. Personally, I'd rather just give myself a bolus before I eat and eat what I want than have to restrict my diet to a certain great extent so that the system can take care of it. Having much faster insulin might help us overcome that at some point. And right now, Fiasp and Lumjav are pretty much the limits of quickness, and they're still not quick enough. An algorithm that's more predictive in nature and learns a person's patterns. Interestingly, none of the AID systems have a learning algorithm except for the iLet. And you think, well, that's the most basic one out there. That one actually does learn because it makes adjustments to the basal pattern based on what's happening in a typical day. And it also adjusts the boluses that it administers based on outcomes, cause and effect. None of the other systems really learn from anything other than how much total insulin a person takes. But the day-to-day deliveries, the boluses and the basal deliveries, they're not really learning and fine-tuning on their own.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had heard that. Well, I know that some of the pump companies are working on more aggressive software. Tandems. In trials, they're calling it Rocket AP. Things like that. So we're not probably going to see those too soon, but they would be more aggressive. But as you said, not perfect.
Yeah. Do you remember back 10 years ago a medication called Simlin?
Yeah.
So Simlin was an injectable you took before meals that really slowed down digestion, and it was replacing the amylin hormone that the pancreas normally makes, and people with type 1 don't make any, type 2s make less than they should. So without this amylin hormone, our food digests much faster than it's supposed to. So it was replacing that. But there are companies now that are looking at combining that Simlin, that amylin hormone, with insulin so that you're getting both. It's similar to the way the body would normally function. That would help as well. That might eliminate the need for conscious bolusing and carb counting going into meals. That's another area we can be looking at. But we need faster insulin, more aggressive algorithms, smarter algorithms, and we probably need to replace more than just insulin. We got to replace that amylin hormone in some way as well.
So one thing that I always try to keep on this list for looking forward to is non-invasive glucose measuring, because I get so much email about this, and I go to a lot of podcasting conferences, and all the tech podcast guys want to ask me, "Oh, do you know your diabetes?" Once they find that out, they're like, "Did you know that next week the iWatch will measure your blood glucose?" Obviously they don't know what they're talking about. This is interesting though, because there are one or two companies that are really putting this forward. They claim to have a reasonable MARD in the teens. Mm-hmm. Where do you see this going? I think it's going to happen, but not next year.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. But yeah, they're using sound waves now.
Yeah.
They used to use light to try to measure through the skin, and it just didn't work. Sound waves, they're having some success with. My key issue here is, what problem is it solving? Is using a Dexcom or a Libre with this little tiny, like a size of a nickel on your skin. You don't feel it under your skin at all. Is it really an improvement over that? Wearing, if it is a watch that's doing the measurement for you, or whatever the device ends up looking like, until it's solving a major problem that we're having, or providing a vast improvement over what's out there now, I'm not that interested in it.
Got it. Is there anything that you are in particular, and we may have already discussed it, like what's on your list for this year? What do you really want to see either get more uptake, more attention, or get approval?
Well, I'm excited about the reemergence of glucagon in the diabetes space. We now have these very easy to administer forms of glucagon in things like the Gvoke pen and
Baqsimi.
Baqsimi, thank you. I knew it had a Q in it. Those are great, if there's an emergency. But, to really mimic normal physiology, we need insulin to lower glucose. We need glucagon to raise it. Without glucagon, it's like you're driving a car with a gas pedal and no brakes. You got no way to stop a falling blood sugar. So having a dual hormone system with insulin and glucagon both being administered, it's a real possibility now, because we have liquid glucagon that's stable for long periods of time at room temp and can be incorporated into a pump. I know Beta Bionics was one of the first companies addressing that. They got slowed down because they just didn't have the glucagon they needed to put in the pumps. But now they're back at work trying to develop that. And from what I've seen, even a system like the iLet with very little user engagement can achieve pretty darn good results if glucagon and insulin are both used in the equation and in the deliveries. So that's something, is a system that has both hormones involved. now things like exercise don't become such a challenge because you can administer glucagon when glucose is starting to go down. In fact, I'll tell you, this is kind of a secret, but we've been experimenting at our practice, and a lot of our patients have been testing this out, using very small doses of glucagon before exercise. And it actually works really well for preventing hypoglycemia during a typical cardio workout.
Wow.
So I think glucagon it's the next great hormone we're going to be looking at over the next few years.
How are your people administering it?
By injection, by syringe. So Xeris has something called the Gvoke Hypo Kit. It's a vial of glucagon. It's not in a pen. It's a vial. And instead of using the syringe that injects the full dose for an emergency, you take an insulin syringe and just give a few units subcutaneously.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know when they came out with the pens, people were concerned about mini dosing and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, heaven forbid we should figure out better ways to do things.
I know. This community always figures it out. I'm not worried about anybody here. You guys are amazing. Absolutely amazing.
We're like 1,000 monkeys typing away at the keyboard. We're going to come up with a masterpiece eventually.
Hey, that gives me a great segue into what I wanted to make sure I mentioned this before we let you go. Speaking of masterpieces, you guys have a new podcast. This is so exciting. Tell me about your new podcast.
We even had a naming contest. And you won the naming contest.
This was so funny. I'm so happy to have helped a little bit.
We were trying to come up with a name for it. And you said, you're so well known for Think Like a Pancreas. Just go with that. And we thought about it and said, Stacey makes sense.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's called Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, and it's on all the channels. You go find it. We're doing 6 recordings, a week apart every season. We just finished recording our 5th. The last one we recorded was about the low carb approaches, and we used mostly our own staff as the experts. So our dietitians, we had the 3 of them on, kind of debating back and forth about the low carb approaches. But we've looked at AID systems and compared them. We've talked about how tight is tight enough when it comes to diabetes management. It's one of the biggest challenges we see with our clients is they get too aggressive and with their diabetes control, and it leads to problems, emotional issues and behavioral issues, hypoglycemia. In our last recording I'm going to do next week with Aaron Kowalski from JDRF, we're going to explore whether there really is a conspiracy to prevent a cure from developing.
I love it. I love it. These are all great. See, I mean, people always ask me, I've been doing this for, 8.5 years, and I love promoting new podcasts. I love when people in the diabetes space start new podcasts. And we were like, why doesn't that take away from you? First of all, it's podcasting.
There's plenty of podcasting.
There's time to listen. I'm not doing this every day, but also the different perspectives are so valuable. I try to keep it kind of news focused here. I don't have type 1, right? I'm a caregiver. But you guys, with your incredible expertise, I don't want to pump you up too much. I cannot wait to listen. That just sounds fantastic. And I think it's a niche that there's a need in the community. So I appreciate that so much. Think Like a Pancreas is just an absolutely amazing resource that you do update all the time. This is not the Think Like a Pancreas from 15 years ago, right? So I'll leave you a plug for that too. The book. Think Like a Pancreas, the book.
And certainly, our practice is always taking new clients. Anybody who's looking for help with their management, take it to the next level, get a tune-up, all that sort of stuff. We're here to help with that.
Well, I really appreciate it, Gary. It's been an interesting and exciting 2023. We shall see what happens in 2024. But as always, I would love to have you back, and I'm sure I will see you soon as well. Thank you for everything you do, and I hope that you start 2024 off happy, healthy, and all the good things.
Same to you, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I always like to link up more about our guests so you can find more about Gary and Integrated Diabetes Services and the new podcast, which I helped them with the title, but that was a pretty easy lift, I got to say. Happy to help. You can find all of that over at diabetes-connections.com. I hope your year is off to a terrific start. We have so much going on in the next weeks and months to come. Of course, we've got this show every week. If you're new around here, I also do an In the News episode, which is a very short episode, less than 10 minutes long, every other Friday. And I have a second podcast now for the Type 2 community called Diabetes Connections Type 2. Also, traveling around a lot this year. At the end of this month, I'm going to a podcasting conference in Florida called She Podcasts. In February, we've got Mom's Night Out Charlotte, new event for moms of kids with diabetes. This event actually kicked off. We had the very first one in Charlotte in 2023, but we're not coming back to North Carolina anytime soon. I got requests from moms all over the country to bring this event to them. So we are now just taking it on the road. After February in Charlotte, we will be in Chicago in April. We will be in Denver in September and Philadelphia in October. And then next year, we've got some cities in pencil, but we will not be coming back to North Carolina or even South Carolina anytime soon. So if you're a listener from that area, that's where I am. So I've got a lot of moms in that area who listen. Just keep in mind that this is the last Mom's Night Out for a while that you'll be able to get to that easily. And you can register right up to the week before. So you do have just a little bit more time. If you're interested in learning more, just head on over to diabetes-connections.com. There's a Mom's Night Out tab now. It was the event tab, but you can learn more and sign up for city-specific alerts and announcements. I'm not going to go through the whole year, but I do want to also tell you that in March, I'm going to be at the JDRF One Nation Summit for Greater New England. Super excited to be keynoting that event with Carrie Sparling. We are doing a joint keynote there, which should be a lot of fun. And I've got tons of stuff coming up for the rest of the year, so my frequent flyer miles are definitely going to be piling up. All right, thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
I am so excited about the Dexcom G7. I know you probably still have a lot of questions about insurance. You are not alone. Dexcom understands how complicated this can seem, and they've made it as simple as possible. Dexcom is the #1 covered CGM brand. You can visit the Dexcom Savings Center for a free benefits check to see what coverage options are available to you. Powerful and simple. Dexcom G7 is proven to lower A1C and help you spend more time in range. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.